Japan is about to spend $70 billion on its military this year alone. That's more than the entire defense budgets of France or the United Kingdom. A huge chunk of that money isn't staying in Japan. It's flowing directly to American defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, halfway across the Pacific. So who's winning here? In this video, we're going to follow the money and see which American companies are cashing in, why Japan keeps buying instead of building, and what this dependency is quietly costing Japan. For decades after World War II, Japan operated under a self-imposed cap, spending no more than 1% of GDP on defense. It was a political and cultural choice rooted in the trauma of the war. The post-war constitution, specifically Article 9, nominally forbade Japan from using military force beyond the narrowest definition of self-defense. The country built a pacifist identity around that constraint. That started changing in 2012 under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who began gradually expanding the defense budget. But the real rupture came in December 2022, when Japan released a new national security strategy, a sweeping document that essentially rewrote its entire security posture. Japan committed to doubling its defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027. It authorized the development of counterstrike capabilities, meaning Japan would no longer just absorb an attack. It could now, in theory, strike enemy launch sites before missiles hit Japanese soil. The numbers since then have been staggering. So Japan's defense budget has grown every single year since 2013. By fiscal year 2025, Japan reached that 2% of GDP target 2 years ahead of schedule, with total defense spending hitting approximately $70 billion, roughly 11 trillion yen. That makes Japan one of the top 5 defense spenders on the planet. Spending more doesn't automatically mean spending at home. When Japan goes shopping for advanced weapons, the default destination is the United States. The mechanism for this is called the Foreign Military Sales Program, or FMS, a government-to-government arrangement where the U.S. Department of Defense acts as a middleman between foreign buyers and American defense companies. Japan's FMS purchases have exploded. Between 2014 and 2019 alone, they more than tripled, from roughly 190 billion yen to over 700 billion yen annually. Under the current 5-year defense capability build-up program, running from 2023 to 2027, Japan's planned annual FMS spending is set to rise from $14.8 billion to $22.5 billion. Let that sink in. By 2027, Japan will be sending over $22 billion per year to American defense contractors under this single program. So what exactly is Japan buying? The list is a who's who of American defense hardware. F-35 fighter jets. In 2020, the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency approved the sale of 105 additional F-35s to Japan in a deal worth approximately $23 billion, with Lockheed Martin as the prime contractor. If completed, Japan would operate 147 F-35s total, making it the second largest operator of the aircraft in the world, behind only the United States. Tomahawk cruise missiles. In January 2024, Japan signed a foreign military sales contract for up to 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles, a mix of Block 4 and 5 variants made by Raytheon. These are being integrated into Japan's fleet of Aegis-equipped destroyers to give Japan a long-range strike capability it has never had before. Aegis destroyers and missile defense systems. Japan is also funding 2 brand-new Aegis-guided missile destroyers, equipped with American missile defense technology, part of a broader effort to build layered protection against North Korean ballistic missiles and potential Chinese threats. The scale of these purchases is unlike anything Japan has done before, and every one of these deals has American companies collecting the checks. So let's name names. The primary beneficiaries of Japan's rearmament boom are a small group of American defense giants. Lockheed Martin is the single biggest winner. As the prime contractor on the F-35 program, it captures the largest share of Japan's aircraft spending. The F-35 deal alone, at roughly $23 billion, exceeds the entire annual defense budgets of many mid-sized countries. Raytheon Technologies is the manufacturer of the Tomahawk missiles and a key supplier of missile defense components, including PAC-3 interceptors that Japan is also purchasing to replace aging stockpiles. Northrop Grumman and Boeing are also present in the supply chain. Japan has shown interest in Northrop's MQ-4C Triton surveillance drones and Boeing's underwater vehicles as it tries to modernize for a potential conflict with China. The broader picture is captured by the U.S. State Department's own data. In fiscal year 2024, the total value of transferred U.S. defense articles and services through FMS reached a record $117.9 billion, a 45.7% jump over the previous year. Japan is consistently one of the top recipients in this system. What makes the FMS program particularly lucrative for American contractors is that pricing is largely opaque to the buyer. Japan has repeatedly complained about cost overruns in FMS contracts. In one notable case, the cost to upgrade Japan's fleet of F-15 fighter jets, a separate program, initially doubled from the original U.S. One estimate before Japan successfully negotiated it back down. And because FMS contracts are priced in U.S. dollars, Japan's weak yen has made these purchases increasingly expensive. In fiscal year 2023, currency depreciation alone added an extra 123.9 billion yen, nearly $1 billion, to Japan's FMS bill, with no contractual mechanism to protect against that risk. Here, the story turns uncomfortable for Tokyo. Japan actually has a sophisticated industrial base. Companies like Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Kawasaki Heavy Industries, IHI Corporation, and Fujitsu are world-class manufacturers with deep engineering capabilities. In theory, Japan should be able to build many of the weapons it needs. And for decades, it did, producing tanks, warships, aircraft, and submarines for its own self-defense forces. But here's what happened. As Japan ramped up FMS purchases of high-end American systems, domestic defense procurement stagnated. The money that could have gone to Japanese contractors went to American ones instead, and the structural damage to Japan's defense industry has been significant. Defense-related revenues account for less than 10% of total sales at most major Japanese defense contractors. For comparison, at major U.S. defense firms, that figure is around 90%. Because defense is a secondary business for Japanese manufacturers, they can't justify the large-scale investment in production facilities and R&D that would make them competitive. And, without that investment, they fall further behind, a cycle that feeds on itself. The profit margins tell the same story. While major U.S. defense contractors operate at margins of 10% or more, Japanese defense contractors typically see margins below 5%. The government has recently announced plans to raise the ceiling on defense contractor profit margins to 15%, a tacit acknowledgement that the current structure isn't working. The consequences are already showing up in the form of industry withdrawals. Komatsu, once one of Japan's top defense suppliers, stopped developing armored vehicles after failing to meet updated military requirements. Mitsui E&S Shipbuilding sold its warship unit. Dassault Corporation dropped its defense business entirely. Sumitomo Heavy Industries stopped making machine guns. Japan's own acquisition, Technology and Logistics Agency, the body responsible for defense procurement, has acknowledged that sustaining the domestic industrial base is, in their words, a challenge. The number of companies in Japan's Defense Industry Federation with active defense operations has shrunk by roughly 10 in recent years. This isn't a trend, it's a structural erosion. Now consider what this means in an actual crisis. Japan is an island nation. In any serious military conflict, particularly one involving China or North Korea, its ports and sea lanes would likely be contested or cut off early in the fighting. That means Japan cannot count on resupply the way Ukraine has been able to receive Western weapons overland. Whatever Japan has stockpiled and whatever it can manufacture domestically is largely what it would have to fight with. Analysts at Foreign Policy and the Center for Strategic and International Studies have both raised this concern directly. Japan's defense industrial capacity is too thin to sustain a prolonged conflict. Defense manufacturing represents less than 1% of Japan's total industrial output. For the United States, it's around 10%. That gap isn't just a statistic, it's a measure of resilience. There's also the question of strategic autonomy. When Japan deploys Tomahawks, or F-35s, it depends on American supply chains for spare parts, software updates, maintenance support, and munitions replenishment. In a scenario where U.S. policy priorities shift, or where Washington's hands are full elsewhere, Japan's advanced arsenal could be rendered partially inoperable simply through a lack of logistical support. This is not a hypothetical concern. It's one the Japanese government itself has begun to take seriously, which is why the 2022 National Security Strategy explicitly called for strengthening domestic production and technology as an indispensable foundation for security. To be fair, Japan isn't just passively writing checks to American contractors. There are real efforts underway to build indigenous capability. Japan is a founding partner in the Global Combat Air Program, GCAP, a joint project with the United Kingdom and Italy to develop a sixth-generation stealth fighter. If successful, this would replace Japan's aging F-2 fleet and give Japanese companies like Mitsubishi a central role in a cutting-edge program, rather than a secondary subcontractor role in an American one. Japan is also developing upgraded versions of its Type 12 anti-ship missiles, building a new satellite constellation for targeting and surveillance, and investing in hypersonic glide weapons, all domestically. In 2023, it passed the Defense Production Base Reinforcement Act, which provides financial support to defense supply chains and is intended to prevent further industry withdrawals. The government has also loosened rules on defense exports, which is critical to the economics. Japan's domestic market alone is too small to justify the R&D and production investment needed to build competitive weapons. Exports create the economies of scale that make it viable. Japan's first real test of this was its failed submarine bid with Australia in 2016, a painful lesson in the gap between having good technology and knowing how to sell it globally. That experience has not been forgotten. But progress is slow. The Japan Business Federation's defense industry membership is still shrinking. And the same report from the Institute of Geoeconomics notes that even as the defense budget grows, a disproportionate share continues flowing to American imports rather than domestic producers. So back to the original question, who really profits when Japan buys American weapons instead of building its own? In the short term, the answer is clear: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and the broader American defense industrial ecosystem. They're collecting tens of billions of dollars annually from Japan's security transformation, with FMS spending projected to hit $22.5 billion a year by 2027. Japan gets real military capability out of these deals. No one disputes that F-35s and Tomahawks are serious weapons. But the cost isn't just measured in yen. Every dollar that flows to an American contractor is a dollar that doesn't go to Mitsubishi, Kawasaki, or the next generation of Japanese defense engineers. The domestic industrial base keeps shrinking. The dependency on American supply chains keeps deepening, and the strategic vulnerability of an island nation that can't fully sustain its own arsenal in wartime keeps getting quietly worse. Japan's leadership knows this. That's why the shift toward domestic production and international export partnerships is now an official policy. Whether it can move fast enough before the industry erodes further is one of the defining questions of Japan's security decade.